The Dyatlov Pass incident, Whispers in the Snow by Norma Law. The wind was a living thing up here, a biting, relentless beast that clawed at my exposed skin and howled through the jagged peaks of the Ural Mountains. I am a man who prides himself on his logic and resilience in the face of nature's harshness, had come seeking answers where others had only found frozen silence. The Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 experienced hikers, dead in the snow, their demise shrouded in mystery for decades. I devoured every theory, every grainy photograph, every whispered speculation. Now, I was walking their last steps, a solitary figure against a landscape that seemed to hold its breath. The first few days were a brutal test of endurance. The snow was deep, the air thin and sharp. I followed the coordinates meticulously, the ghost of their ill-fated trek my only companion. Then, the anomalies began. Tracks that veered off course, disappearing abruptly as if their maker had been lifted into the sky. Remnants of their camp, eerily preserved by the cold, yet scattered in a way that defied any logical explanation for a sudden avalanche or animal attack. A torn tent, sliced from the inside. It was in the lee of a towering rock face that I first heard them. Faint whispers carried on the wind, disoriented fragments of sound that seemed to weave in and out of the howling gale. They spoke no discernible language, just guttural sighs and panicked breaths, the echoes of a terror long past. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, the mournful cry of the mountains themselves. But the feeling that accompanied the whispers was undeniably human, a palpable sense of fear and disorientation that seeped into my very bones. As I climbed higher, towards the pass itself, the weather turned volatile. A blizzard descended with sudden fury, the world dissolving into a swirling white chaos. Visibility dropped to near zero. The wind became a deafening roar, and the crunch of my boots on the snow was swallowed by the storm's hungry maw. It was in this whiteout that I saw them, fleeting shapes in the periphery, too tall, too gaunt to be any natural formation. They moved with an unnatural swiftness, disappearing as quickly as they appeared, leaving me with the chilling certainty that I was not alone in this frozen wasteland. Then came the shouts, distant, panicked cries that seemed to emanate from the heart of the storm, carried on the wind like the tormented souls of the lost hikers. They were cries of pure terror, raw and desperate, and they resonated with a primal fear that bypassed my logic and struck directly at my soul. My carefully constructed theories, my rational explanations, began to crumble like ice under a sudden thaw. A wave of overwhelming panic washed over me, a suffocating dread that had no discernible source. It was a terror so profound, so visceral, that it stripped away my years of hiking experience, my carefully honed self-control. I had to get out, now. The rational part of my brain screamed at the irrationality of my fear, but my instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, were screaming louder. Something was wrong here, terribly wrong. I abandoned my carefully planned route, scrambling down the mountainside with a desperate urgency I had never known. The blizzard raged around me, the wind tearing at my clothes, the snow blinding me. I stumbled and fell, driven by a primal need to escape the unseen presence that seemed to be closing in. I don't remember much of the descent, just a blur of white and the relentless, terrifying whispers that seemed to follow me on the wind. I finally stumbled out of the high peaks, half frozen and delirious, collapsing at the edge of a sparse pine forest. I survived, barely. But something broke within me on that mountain. The logical, intrepid hiker who had set out seeking answers returned a haunted man. I could no longer look at a snow-covered landscape without a shiver of unease. The indifference of nature, once a challenge to be overcome, now feels like a malevolent force. And in the howling of the wind, I still hear them, the faint, chilling whispers of the Dyatlov Pass, a constant reminder that some tragedies leave behind echoes that defy explanation, a lingering presence that chills the very soul. Whatever claimed those 9 hikers still lingers there, a silent, unseen horror woven into the fabric of the snow and the wind, and I felt its icy breath. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Archer Avenue by Melody Porter. Archer Avenue at 3 in the morning is a lonely stretch of asphalt. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows, and the only sounds are the hum of my delivery van and the occasional distant wail of a train. I am a creature of habit, forged by the graveyard shift, had driven this route countless times. I'd seen my share of odd things, stray animals, the occasional drunk leaving home, but nothing prepared me for the woman in white. It was a few weeks ago. She stood by the side of the road, just past the old Willow Creek Bridge, her thumb outstretched. Even in the dim headlights, I could see the stark whiteness of her dress, a stark contrast to the inky blackness of the night. There was something ethereal about her, the way she seemed to shimmer in the weak light. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. She slipped into the passenger seat without a word, her head bowed, her face obscured by shadows. "Resurrection Cemetery," she finally murmured, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, a little unnerved by her silence, the almost palpable sadness that seemed to emanate from her. The inside of the van suddenly felt colder, a damp chill that seeped into my bones despite the heater running. There was a faint scent of flowers, like lilies, too strong to be natural at this hour. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes dark and vacant. She didn't meet my gaze. When we reached the imposing iron gates of Resurrection Cemetery, I looked over to tell her we were there. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I chalked it up to exhaustion, a trick of the late hour playing on my mind. But a few nights later, she was there again, in the same spot, the same white dress. Again, the silent ride, the chilling cold, the scent of lilies, the vanishing act at the cemetery gates. This time, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I started asking around at the depot, the all-night diner. Had anyone else seen a woman in white on Archer Avenue? That's when I heard the stories. Resurrection Mary, a local legend, a phantom hitchhiker who'd been appearing on this stretch of road for decades, always vanishing near the cemetery where she was supposedly buried. The details varied, but the core remained the same. A young woman in white seeking a ride to her final resting place. Each subsequent encounter chipped away at my pragmatism, replacing it with a growing sense of dread. The cold in the van intensified. The scent of lilies became cloying, almost suffocating. I started avoiding eye contact in the rearview mirror, afraid of what I might see in those vacant eyes. The silence in the van was no longer just the absence of sound. It felt like a heavy, oppressive presence. Then came the night she spoke again. It was the same soft whisper, but this time I could make out the words. "It's cold." Her voice was laced with such profound sorrow, such a deep, aching loneliness that it sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. As I pulled up to the cemetery gates, she turned towards me, her pale face finally illuminated by the streetlight. Her eyes, those dark, empty pools, were filled with an unspeakable sadness. Her hand reached out, brushing against my arm. The touch was like ice, a sudden, searing cold that left my skin feeling numb. She pointed a slender, almost translucent finger towards the darkened rows of headstones, her expression one of profound longing. Then she was gone, vanished into the cold night air as if she had never been there at all. I drove away from Archer Avenue that night with a terror that clung to me like the scent of lilies. I still work the night shift, still drive that route. But now, every time I approach the Willow Creek Bridge, my heart pounds in my chest. I scan the roadside, half expecting, half dreading to see the woman in white. I've learned to live with the cold that sometimes settles in my van for no reason, the phantom scent of flowers that occasionally fills the air. But the memory of her touch, that icy burn, and the desolate longing in her eyes remain. I am forever haunted by the phantom hitchhiker of Archer Avenue, a silent testament to unfinished business and the lingering presence of tragedy on a lonely stretch of road. And every night, as I drive past Resurrection Cemetery, I can't help but feel a profound sadness for the spectral woman forever seeking her way home. The Screaming Tunnel's Curse by Christine Lee. It's just a story, guys. Chill. That was Liam, ever the bravest or perhaps the most foolish of our little group. We stood at the mouth of the screaming tunnel, the late Ontario night air thick with the dampness of the nearby Niagara River and a prickle of something else, something ancient and unsettling. The local legend was simple, brutal. A young woman, set ablaze within these very confines, her dying screams forever echoing through the narrow passage. Scream her death cry, they said, and she might just answer. We were teenagers, 18 and brimming with that potent cocktail of boredom and invincibility. Of course, we were going to scream. The tunnel itself was oppressive, the concrete walls slick with moisture, the darkness swallowing our flashlight beams. The air hung heavy, stagnant, carrying a faint, earthy smell. Our initial shouts were nervous laughter disguised as bravado, the echoes bouncing back at us, distorted and hollow. Nothing happened. Liam smirked. See? Told ya. But as we ventured deeper, a subtle shift occurred. The temperature dropped noticeably, a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The echoes of our voices seemed wrong, lingering too long, overlapping in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then we heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the damp air, too soft to understand, but undeniably there. Even Liam's bravado faltered. We spent what felt like hours in the tunnel's claustrophobic embrace, our initial excitement replaced by a growing unease. The whispers became more frequent, sometimes sounding like distressed murmurs, other times like sharp intakes of breath. Then the sounds intensified. A dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the rough concrete floor. A sob, choked and filled with unimaginable pain. Objects we had brought, a discarded plastic bottle, a half-eaten bag of chips, began to move on their own. The bottle skittered across the ground, stopping inches from Maya's foot. The chip bag rustled violently, as if something was thrashing inside. Maya, usually the most skeptical among us, gripped my arm, her knuckles white. Then the air changed. The dampness was replaced by a dry, acrid smell, sharp and sickening, the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke, but something far more foul, like burnt hair and flesh. A wave of nausea washed over me, and then it came. The scream. It started as a low, guttural moan, rising in intensity with terrifying speed, a sound ripped from the very depths of human suffering. It was a woman's scream, raw and agonizing, filled with a pain so profound it felt like a physical blow. The air in the tunnel vibrated with the sheer force of it, pressing against our eardrums, clawing at our sanity. Our flashlights flickered violently, casting grotesque dancing shadows on the slick walls. At the tunnel's entrance, a fleeting image materialized in the darkness. A charred figure, gaunt and indistinct, its form writhing as if still consumed by flames. The smell of smoke intensified, choking us, filling our lungs with a phantom ash. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the tunnel, and Liam cried out, clutching his leg. We couldn't see what had happened in the dim light, but a dark stain was spreading rapidly on his jeans. Panic erupted. The horrifying scream continued, a relentless auditory assault that threatened to shatter our minds. We scrambled back towards the entrance, a chaotic mass of terror and flailing limbs. The image of the burning figure flickered again, closer this time, accompanied by the overwhelming stench of burnt flesh. The scream seemed to follow us, echoing in our ears, even as we burst out of the tunnel's suffocating darkness and into the relatively clean night air. We didn't stop running until we reached Liam's car, our breath coming in ragged gasps, the horrifying scream still ringing in our ears. Liam was bleeding badly, a jagged, inexplicable wound on his calf. We never found out what caused it. We drove away from the screaming tunnel that night, leaving behind more than just our youthful bravado. We left behind a piece of our sanity, a part of us forever scarred by the terror we had awakened. Maya, usually so quick with a sarcastic remark, hasn't spoken a word about that night since. She's plagued by nightmares, she says, of fire and a scream that never ends. The smell of smoke makes her physically ill. As for me, I can still feel the dampness of those tunnel walls, the sudden bone-chilling cold. And in the dead of night, when the wind whispers through the trees, I sometimes hear it, faint but unmistakable, the echo of a woman's dying scream. A chilling reminder of the price of reckless curiosity and the angry spirit we dared to disturb. The legends we learned that night were more than just stories. Some places are best left silent. The Spectral Guests of the Queen Mary by Isolde Walter. They called her a grand old dame, the Queen Mary. Now permanently docked in Long Beach, a floating hotel and museum, a relic of a bygone era. For me, she was just my place of work. A big, echoing steel beast that smelled perpetually of salt water and aged wood. The ghost stories? Tourists' tales, I'd always figured. Something to spice up the guided tours. I was a man of logic, of routine. Ghosts were for children, and the overly imaginative. My first few weeks were quiet. Long, solitary patrols through dimly lit corridors, the only sounds my own footsteps and the creak of the ship settling in the water. Then I started hearing them. Faint footsteps, echoing ahead of me on decks I knew were deserted. I'd stop, listen intently, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, but find nothing. Just empty passageways and locked staterooms. The unease began to settle in, like the persistent sea mist that often clung to the California coast. It wasn't just the footsteps. Sometimes I'd catch a fleeting glimpse in my peripheral vision, a pale figure in white disappearing around a corner, the briefest impression of children laughing near the old drained swimming pools. Each time, when I turned to look directly, there was nothing. My mind playing tricks in the dead of night, I told myself. The long hours, the monotonous routine. But then the objects started moving. A stack of brochures on a reception desk would be inexplicably scattered. A door I'd secured would swing gently open. One night in the ballroom, I swore I heard the faint strains of music, a ghostly waltz that faded as quickly as it began. It was like the ship itself was sighing, remembering its past life, its grand voyages across the vast ocean. Curiosity, tinged with a growing disquiet, led me to the ship's archives. I pored over old passenger lists, faded photographs, and yellowed news clippings. Tales of accidents at sea, of sudden illnesses, of lives lost on board. A young woman in white, a tragic figure who supposedly haunts the upper decks. Children who drowned in the pool. A sailor crushed in the engine room. The stories, once dismissed, now clung to the cold steel walls with a chilling resonance. One night, my patrol took me deep into the bowels of the ship, the engine room. The air was thick with the metallic tang of old machinery and the faint, persistent scent of salt water. The rhythmic hum of the ship's systems was usually the loudest sound down there, but tonight, there was something else. A low, guttural murmur, like the ocean itself was sighing in distress. I swept my flashlight beam across the massive turbines, the gauges, the pipes. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure coalescing in the corner of my vision, taller than any man, its form indistinct but undeniably present. A wave of icy dread washed over me, a primal fear that had nothing to do with logic or reason. The murmuring intensified, and then it felt like the air itself was thickening, becoming heavy, waterlogged. A pressure built in my chest, a suffocating sensation, as if I were being pulled under. The shadowy figure seemed to reach out, its formless hand gesturing towards the depths of the ship, towards the unseen water that surrounded us. An overwhelming feeling of drowning, of being dragged down into the cold, dark abyss, gripped me. I gasped for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stumbled backward, my flashlight clattering on the steel floor. The shadowy figure remained, its silent presence radiating a profound sense of sorrow in the cold, unforgiving vastness of the sea. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it began to dissipate, fading back into the shadows, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the suffocating memory of drowning. That was the night I knew. The Queen Mary wasn't just an old ship. It was a vessel carrying the echoes of its past, the lingering pain and sorrow of those who had sailed and died upon its decks. I finished my shift, handed in my keys, and walked away. I couldn't reconcile what I had seen, what I had felt, with the rational world I once inhabited. Now, the mere sight of the ocean fills me with a cold dread, a visceral fear of the deep, and the unsettling certainty that the past, like the tide, will always find its way back. The grand old dame keeps her spectral guests, and I will forever be haunted by the silent plea in the shadows and the phantom taste of salt water on my tongue. The Whispering Walls of Franklin Castle by Elias Coffey. The job description had been straightforward enough: caretaker for Franklin Castle. A grand old pile in Cleveland, steeped in history, they said. Neglected, perhaps, but with a certain character. I, being a man of practical sensibilities, saw it as a means to an end, a quiet existence amidst antique dust and echoing silence. The rumors of hauntings, local color, I'd figured. Amusing anecdotes for the tourists who occasionally peered through the iron gates. The first week was uneventful. Days spent oiling squeaky hinges and sweeping cobweb-laden halls. The nights were quiet, save for the wind whistling through broken window panes. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves just beyond my hearing. I dismissed them as the old house settling, the groan of aged timber. But they persisted, a low murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. One Tuesday evening, while making my rounds, a door on the third floor, one I'd sworn I'd secured, stood ajar. A draft, I reasoned, though there was no discernible breeze. The air in that hallway was noticeably colder, a sudden sharp drop that raised gooseflesh on my arms. As I reached for the handle, a distinct whisper brushed past my ear, too close, too clear to be the wind. It sounded like my name. Arthur. Doubt, a seed I thought long dead, began to sprout. The following days brought more unsettling occurrences. Shadows flickered in my peripheral vision, too swift, too defined to be tricks of the dim light. Footsteps echoed on the upper floors when I knew I was alone. Then, the discovery. Behind a loose panel in the library, I found a collection of old photographs, portraits of stern-faced individuals, some with dates that stretched back over a century. There were also children's toys, a worn wooden doll with vacant eyes, and a small, leather-bound diary. Its pages, brittle with age, spoke of illness, of loss, and of a growing despair within the castle's walls. Mentions of unexplained noises, of cold spots, and a pervasive feeling of being watched chilled me more than the castle's drafty corridors ever could. The legends, it turned out, were not just local color. My research at the local historical society confirmed the castle's grim history. Numerous deaths within its walls, a family plagued by tragedy, whispers of secret rooms and hidden passages. The more I learned, the more oppressive the castle's atmosphere became. The echoing silence now felt heavy, expectant. The cold spots lingered, clinging to certain rooms like unseen mourners. And the whispers grew bolder, sometimes forming unintelligible words. Other times my name again, laced with a chilling familiarity. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing unease, I began to explore the castle more thoroughly, venturing into forgotten corners and dusty alcoves. That's when I found it. A hidden door concealed behind a tapestry in what must have been a master bedroom. It led to a small, windowless room, the air thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. The moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic flared in my chest, a tight, suffocating grip. I fumbled for a light switch, but there was none. The darkness was absolute, pressing in on me. Then, the whispers erupted, a chorus of voices swirling around me, no longer faint but sharp, insistent. They spoke my name, over and over, in tones of sorrow, of anger, of something far more sinister. I felt a presence in the room, a cold, heavy weight that seemed to push against me. I clawed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Claustrophobia, a fear I thought I'd conquered in my youth, clawed its way back, amplified by the unseen forces that held me captive. A child's faint cry echoed from somewhere within the darkness, followed by a cold breath on the back of my neck. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, chilling phrase that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. "You're one of us now." With a surge of adrenaline, born of pure terror, I threw my weight against the door again and again. Finally, with a groan of protesting wood, it shuddered open. I stumbled out, gasping for breath, the cacophony of whispers receding as I fled. I didn't stop running until I was outside the castle gates, the cold night air a welcome balm against my fevered skin. I looked back at the looming silhouette against the moonlit sky, its darkened windows like vacant eyes staring into my soul. I never went back inside. The job, the quiet existence, the antique dust, none of it mattered anymore. Now, years later, I still hear them sometimes, the faint whispers on the wind, the chilling echo of my name. And in the dead of night, I can still feel that cold breath on my neck, a constant reminder of the whispering walls of Franklin Castle and the secrets they so desperately wanted to keep.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.